Hello and welcome to the $1 Million Message. This is your Fearless Friday message with Callie DeBlander Brigham, calling from beautiful Pensacola Beach, Florida. Thank you so much, Tiff, for filling in for me last week. You always do such an amazing job. And for those of you that are newer to the $1 Million Message, Tiffany Stout is the OG. She is the originator of this idea that we started many, many years ago, 10 years ago. So thank you, Tiff. Well, I'm going to jump back into a little training series that I started a couple of weeks ago. We have modeled in our weekly virtual events the training that Gloria Mayfield Banks says that every consultant should know to be successful. And she calls it STEM, and it stands for the skills, time management, emotional management, and money management. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about emotional management. It's actually one of my favorite topics. I know. I find it fascinating, the psychology of it. And so I'm going to take what I probably trained on for about 30 minutes and try to condense it into about a third of that. So here we go. Now, there's obviously so many different things that we could talk about with emotional management. But before we do, I just want to say that if this is something that you struggle with, that's hard to get a grip on, that seems to be a challenge for you, I just want you to know that so many times we bring our previous habits, our previous thoughts, our previous patterns into Mary Kay, and this is a safe place to bring it into. So sometimes we can blame our Mary Kay business or think it's our Mary Kay business's fault for what we're going through, especially the last three, time, emotions, and money. But the reality is we're bringing a history of these things into Mary Kay. And so Mary Kay is not to blame, but sometimes it does sort of flip the light switch on, doesn't it? Like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was hiding in the corner. And so, again, this is a safe place to learn and grow and create new cycles and new patterns. And so I want you to first think about what part of emotional management is it that needs some tweaking, that needs some fixing, that needs some adjustment, because it's probably not all of it. There just might be an area that tends to keep cropping up that causes you to have, some challenges and some struggle. So 5 things that I want to address today. And the first thing that I want to address is that there's a wild difference between a traditional job, lifestyle, career, and an entrepreneurial one. So especially if you grew up in a traditional home, whether that meant one or two parents working outside the home, but typically, an 8 to 5 kind of situation, a couple weeks of vacation a year, weekends off, holidays off, that kind of thing. Also, that could tend to mean a salary position where you're going to get paid a certain amount for a certain amount of time that you put in. Well, guess what? Entrepreneurs shake that whole thing up. It looks completely different. And I think we have to know that we can't compare the two. It's just not going to look the same. And sometimes our emotions are caught up in thinking that it needs to be inside a box. But the reality is an entrepreneur understands that sometimes there is something called investing, right? Which means investing is you put in something now to get something later. That doesn't even have to be money. It could be time. It could be energy. Also protecting. An entrepreneur has to protect their dream at all costs, because not everybody's going to understand it. And sometimes they're vocal about that. Whereas in a traditional job, usually it's just the grind. It is what it is. But somehow people seem to think that they can rip a dream from an entrepreneur, so it has to be protected. Entrepreneurs also understand that there's planting and then there's harvesting. And the reality is they're usually not done at the same time, right? Usually the planting is done. And then there's a time when later on the harvesting begins. And many entrepreneurs quit before that harvest time happens. So we just have to know there's a long game. Also, entrepreneurs know that something that my dad would say to my mom when she was starting her business. My parents have both been entrepreneurs pretty much my whole life. But, she would face a crisis whether it really was one or not, or she would have an emotional come apart or a disappointment, and she would, be in a place where, it's devastating, and I just want to put the blankets over my head and not get out of bed. And my dad would say 2 words to her: "That's normal." That's normal. And somehow it's like deflating a balloon. It's like, oh, really? Oh, okay. That's normal for somebody to not do what they said they were going to do. That's normal for sometimes clients to buy and then return. That's normal for somebody to get started and be a superstar and then decide they're going to quit and, go to something else. That's normal. That's normal. That was such a great emotional management asset that my mom had. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the entrepreneur lifestyle mindset, I've mentioned this 1,000 times, but I would encourage you to listen to a podcast called How I Built This. It's not a construction podcast. It's a podcast where the host interviews entrepreneurs and business leaders, business starters, really. Everything from, you've heard me say, the founders of Instagram, Chicken Salad Chick, the founders of Airbnb and Spanx. 2 of my favorites that may not be as well known, for those of you that have listened to it, are Stacy's Pita Chips, how sort of an accident turned into their main product, and the Ring doorbell. The Ring doorbell guy, oh my goodness, talk about ups and downs. So the reason I would have you listen to this is to understand what happens in an entrepreneur's life. That it's not this steady climb to success, that not everybody understood, and that people are wildly different. Some people are entrepreneurs because they believe in a product. Some people are entrepreneurs because they want to be their own boss. Some people are entrepreneurs because they love to take a risk. Some people are highly educated in it. Some people are street smart. And so when you listen to that, I think it will help you to understand what it looks and feels like to choose an entrepreneurial lifestyle, which in my opinion, if you made a list of pros and cons, even though there are some tough times, the pros wildly outweigh. Number 2 that I talked about were triggers. I could do a whole series on this, and I have before. But positive and negative triggers. Sometimes we have to be very clear and aware of the things that take us down and the things that bring us back up. Negative triggers are typically things that we have no control over. And we all have our own. They're not universal. But they could be things like the weather, not having enough margin with your schedule, disappointments, cancellations, comparison on the scoreboard. It could be, a no. It could be something that someone said that, reflects something in your childhood that hurt. Maybe you were known as the pretty one or the smart one or the not pretty one or the not smart one or the athletic one or the, whatever that might look like. And so understanding that negative triggers, oh my goodness, they're like arrows from the enemy. And so oftentimes they're shot from far away. And before we know it, they've gotten to us. But positive triggers allow us to see that they're coming and put up our shield and fight against them. Positive triggers could be anything, though, that you can control. So it could be things like exercise. It could be things like books that you're reading that you pull out. It could be lighting a candle. It could be your, sipping on your favorite sip. It could be putting on red lipstick or high heels. It's something that you can combat that with. You've got to know what both of those are. Be very clear and very specific, because when you do, you're not you don't have to be as surprised, and they don't have to take you down as long. I also want to be very clear, too, that some of these things need to be handled by a professional. Emotional management says sometimes, these are things that I need someone who's trained in this to help me walk through, because I'm sick and tired of having the same negative triggers and not being able to fight them. So it's kind of like self-coaching, being able to coach yourself through situations, because you don't always have to be on the defensive. You can be on the offensive. So when you look at the weather tomorrow and it looks like it's going to rain, instead of being like, well, I guess I'm not going to, accomplish much, it's like, oh, wait, my positive trigger when it rains is fill in the blank, so that I can still have the kind of day that I want. Number 3, who we listen to and share with and vent to. We have to be so careful, don't we? The Dream Giver is a book that I love that talks about border bullies that are trying to keep Ordinary, the main character of the book, in staying in his comfort zone and not leaving to go after his dream. Why do these people behave like this? Well, sometimes it is jealousy, but more often than not, it's because they do care for you. It's because they want to protect you. And when they hear you sad or disappointed because you vented to them or shared with them, then they're going to try to get you out of that sad place, which sometimes could mean not wanting to steal that dream, but maybe saying, oh, you know what, you're safer and better off over here instead. They're usually willing to understand and give you acceptable excuses. Yeah, those things sound good. They sound right. But really all they are excuses. So who do you want to listen to, share with, and vent to? My suggestion is you have one person or two in your Mary Kay business that you can vent to that understands. And I would also suggest that you tell them if you just need to vent, because they're going to try to fix you otherwise. So sometimes we just got to get it out. Blech. And then we can move on. And they could say, girl, you feel better now? So make sure, though, you tell them ahead of time that you're getting ready to vent. And so this is a critical piece to emotional management. Number 4, I want you to know that problems don't mean that you're not meant to do this, period. Sometimes emotional management is we're always wondering, is this a sign? Is this a sign? This is too hard. This hurts too much. It's uncomfortable. I don't like this. And so, you know what? I'm not meant to, again, fill in the blank. Absolutely not. You know, you are building your story, and your story is going to have times of challenge. Every great story, every great victory does. A question to ask yourself is this something that I will be upset at tomorrow, 1 week from now, 1 month from now, 1 year from now? Is this the thing that's going to bring me down and that's going to stop me? 1 week from now, 1 month from now, 1 year from now, I say, yeah, that was big enough. That was a sign. I should have quit. Or would you say, oh my goodness, that was nothing compared to how badly that I want my story to be told and my testimony. And then lastly, number 5, be okay with who you are. So simple, right? Not just be okay, but be great. If you haven't taken the Strengths Finders test, here's the beauty of it. Everyone has them. Yeah. You don't finish the test. There's 34 strengths. You don't finish the test. They're like, oops, sorry. You don't have any. No. You have 34 strengths. You just have the strongest strengths at the top. And so you all have a top 5 strengths, top 10 strengths. Period. End of story. And so it's knowing what they are, knowing how to use them, knowing how best to have them serve you and to have that be your contribution to the world. I want you to know that comparison makes you feel either superior or inferior. Neither one of those are healthy. So those are 5 emotional management tips for you today. Number 1, embrace that entrepreneurial lifestyle, knowing that it is different. Don't even try to fit it into a traditional box. Number 2, be aware of your triggers, both positive and negative, and use them for your advantage. Number 3, be careful who you're listening to, sharing with, and venting to. Number 4, problems don't mean that you're not meant to do this. It's actually probably the opposite. And number 5, don't just be okay with who you are. Be great with it. Have a wonderful Friday, and I'll be with you next week.